Tommaso Pagliasciolpo, who recently passed away and was at our first conference, said that he thought that the challenges were threefold. He said you need to be sustainable financially, meaning you don't have crisis and default. You need to be sustainable resource or ecologically, and you also need to be sustainable socially. And I think one of the great challenges that we face as we recognize that we've mispriced energy, undervaluing the toxic side effects for the biosphere, and are exhausting other resources. At some level, that wake-up call is a negative productivity shock. And in the United States, which has an absolute level of living standards so much higher than other places in the world, as you said, the biosphere may constrain, the distribution of growth may be as or more important than the level of growth. But the question of social sustainability, when you're compressing living standards, it may be that we don't need to consume as much as we do, and it may actually be ultimately dangerous for society. But moving us from here to there, moving people to accepting and feel good about a life which is a lower standard of consumption or whatever habits they're used to. That's a very formidable political challenge.
No doubt. I think part of it is we are in the process as a society of redefining wealth and redefining what well-being means. And Joe Stiglitz, who obviously works very closely with INET, is now at the leading edge of work on alternative metrics for GDP. And so I think, and this, by the way, this work's been going on for 20 years. People thinking about alternatives to GDP as a measurement of our well-being. So part of it is simply understanding where well-being comes from, and it's not, I don't mean this to sound such like a cliche, but it's not the amount of dollars in your bank account, it's not the amount of toys in the backyard, and unfortunately, the financial system and people working in finance, relative to the rest of the real world, tend to be more focused on material well-being as a source of their personal well-being than the broad population, which is why they end up being good at finance. So it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. The more powerful the financial system is, therefore, the more the economic system is geared toward material wealth generation. And yet, that's not really what most people live for. So I can't articulate in a short conversation how this is going to come out, but I can tell you that I'm involved with lots and lots of people who would reject the notion that our well-being is linked to material well-being beyond a certain point. Certainly, and the research shows this, up to a certain level, income and material goods and having a shelter and having food and whatnot is essential to our happiness and well-being. But there's plenty of research that shows, and you and I probably know plenty of people with more resources than they need who actually aren't happy and aren't.
Wilkinson Pickett's book, The Spirit Level, which we
actually I thought that
at the
was
first conference.
I thought that panel discussion was the best panel in the entire conference.
Well, that's good. I'm glad we got an awful lot of positive commentary about Branko Milanovic, Jamie Galbraith, and Kate Pickett's presentation. And her point was essentially when you get above the material threshold of, say, Portugal, anything beyond that didn't correlate with satisfaction, but the distribution of income and wealth very negatively, as the more skewed it was, the more negative.
And in my standard PowerPoint, I have the exact chart you're referring to, which shows that that there's an inverse correlation between wealth gap and well-being by country.
And we also saw from their book and from Kate's presentation that a cross-sectional study of the 50 United States shows a very similar result.
I'm sure that's right.
So
I'm sure that's right.
I think these tensions about material well-being and the presumption, the kind of implicit faith that more is better, really drawn into question. by their evidence, and that's
Which is good news.
Yeah.
Thank God, because that means that we can actually shift to a different set of priorities and actually achieve more well-being without being dependent on this never-ending cycle of grow, grow, grow. And in fact, it has implications for corporate strategy. Like there are lots of public companies that are no longer growing, so they're sort of mature businesses.
Mm-hmm.
And the way our Wall Street-driven financial system treats them is either figure out how to grow or sell yourself and be done with it.
Yeah. Or do stock buybacks.
Well, if you do stock, I mean, that's actually
that's
a more useful use of your cash flow than trying to grow something that can't grow, or selling yourself to some big company who can then just lay off all the workers because they have their own sales force.
Yeah.
There's a role for maturing companies in an economy that doesn't require them to generate ever greater and greater resources or require more and more resource throughput. And yet they can still provide a service to the society and jobs for people. I actually just met literally yesterday with a group that's looking to raise a fund to deploy just around that strategy, which happens to link directly in with this notion of what many people are now calling a steady state economy, which is a dynamic economy, but in aggregate, not needing to grow perpetually forever.